Road Signs. Chapter 4. In the Womb of the Horse. In the horse's belly, I think, said Schweik, that everything should be looked at impartially. Anyone can make a mistake, and if you think about something for a long time, you will certainly make a mistake. Doctors are people too, and people are prone to mistakes. Once in Nusla, right by the bridge over the Botik, when I was returning from the Banset at night, a gentleman came up to me and hit me on the head with a whip. I, of course, fell to the ground, and he shined the light on me and said, "A mistake, it wasn't him." And this mistake angered him so much that he went and hit me again on the back. Yaroslav Hasek. The Adventures of the Good Soldier Schweik. We ran past a very strange monument to Stalin, which, incidentally, was written on the plywood with an arrow, to Stalin. For some reason it was a monument to Stalin and a camel at the same time. From the grateful Kalmyk people, Vladimir Pavlovich said later. But what did we care about Stalin when we were being chased like the prisoners of old, on whose trail the camp guards had set their service dogs loose? These dogs were approaching. We tried not to look back, and all we heard was the cracking of branches. Having broken away, we ran along the embankment and turned towards the square with the bronze horseman. Vladimir Pavlovich waved his hand at us, and the mathematician was the first to start climbing onto the pedestal. A fairly large hole was discovered in the back of the horse. We, helping each other, climbed inside the rider and froze, catching our breath. The mathematician immediately checked the surrounding space with a dosimeter. Everything was almost within the expected limits. Apparently, the rains had washed away the radioactive dust. We began to peek through the hole at what was happening outside. The dogs followed our trail almost to the very stone and, breathing heavily, stamped their feet below. It seemed that they lacked either the intelligence or the agility to continue the pursuit. But suddenly something changed. Someone else came, and the dogs whined in fear. Someone terrible for dogs had come. An authority had come to build and punish. It was definitely not the delicate cook or any of his equally delicate comrades. And it was unclear whether this was good or not. Trying not to breathe, we waited. But we heard absolutely no sounds except the wind singing in the holes of the statue. An hour passed. Little by little we calmed down, settled in more comfortably, and tried to fall asleep. Vladimir Pavlovich fell asleep right away. The mathematician tossed and turned for a long time, but soon began to snore. And I kept thinking and thinking about the strange turns of fate that brought me here, to another city, and shoved me into the womb of the copper horse. Semetsky pressed himself against me and smacked his lips in his sleep like a big child. Here a man was gobbled up like a can of food, and here you sit like an ancient hero inside a hollow horse. And you are afraid not only to make a lot of fussy movements, but also to simply twitch awkwardly. By the way, it was quite cold in this leaky, ringing building. And if it weren't for the fact that we were lying in a heap, I would not have been able to fall asleep. I imagined how our friends would look at us when we told them what we had seen. I had also seen people who had returned from distant stations, for example, people who were talking about a terrible battle with monsters somewhere in the botanical garden. It was nonsense, some kind of terrible nonsense. And the person who was telling us these passions suddenly got confused and began to insert some details into the story, to lie, to make it clearer and simpler. That is, it became completely unclear where the truth was and where the fiction. I myself, once, when telling about our pigs, who probably have a collective mind, began to fantasize, to add details to make the story more believable. And it turned out to be believable. Those two girls from the Belaruskaya, to whom I was telling this, fell for it and believed me. I even began to believe myself, and later, to my surprise, caught myself thinking that maybe this fits into the scheme proposed by one medieval philosopher, Occam. And once I read a story in the library about two Americans who made a stuffed millionaire with alien features and started breeding his heir. That this millionaire alien was deliberately ruining the nature and atmosphere on Earth in order to make the planet suitable for aliens. The air was taken in, but then these two looked at each other and realized that if you really need to choose the simplest of all explanations, as this Occam taught, then the millionaire really was from space. If only these heroes knew how things would turn out with nature and the atmosphere in reality. After that, I began to look at pigs with respect, and pig farmers too. But I listened to stories about other stations with great caution. Even when someone brought photographs, for example, the plague that was somewhere in the south, I think in Novogirevo, several people from there came to us, and I saw photographs of people in black cloaks and strange masks with long beaks walking through the stations. Then I saw such a picture in a book and stared blankly at the page for a long time. It was some kind of medieval doctor's outfit. Where did medieval doctors come from at Ilyich Square? But no one explained anything. It was all some kind of deception. I then rushed to ask again, but the fugitives had already gone in the direction of Voikovskaya, and there was no one to ask. The best solution here is not to think at all about what and how. You need to think when the wires spark in the area entrusted to you, or smoke starts billowing from the tunnel, and think quickly and efficiently. But what about it? My head will hurt, and my hair is already falling out. Or I was little, and they took me to the zoo. Right next to the ticket office, a man was wandering around, and two wires were spinning madly in his hands. This man was screaming terribly and long-windedly. Now they are talking about mutant rats in the subway. Awesome. The diggers first mistook this creature for a capybara that escaped from the zoo. Dowsing at Krasnopresnenskaya says that there are many animals in the tunnel. The territory of the Krasnopresnensky tectonic knot. Healthy people are turned into ruins here. Car accidents are common here. But there is a white tiger in the zoo. You won't find a better protector. Animals neutralize negativity. My mother closed my eyes and walked me past. Now, I, a person who has seen the results of a delta mutation in real life, no longer laugh at this story. I have seen such capybaras in the tunnels that you just have to hold on. My head was still itching, and I felt with dismay that there really were clumps of hair left on my fingers. This was not a dream. We were already used to having short haircuts to save water, but now it turned out that my short hair had started to fall out. It scared me. I remembered that hair loss was one of the signs of overexposure, but I felt great as only a dweller of the dungeons. A subway rat on the streets of an unfamiliar city can feel. We woke up from the damp morning air and cautiously examined the area. There was no one around, only some strange droppings lay in piles near the monument. The droppings might have been dog droppings, but it was as if a dog, 3 times bigger than Pavlov's unfortunate dogs, had come. Returning to the square, to the gloomy bulk of St. Isaac's Cathedral, we discovered that all our things were where we had left them. No traces of yesterday's dinner were visible. Oh well, we were hardened enough to take such things calmly. The main thing here was to take care of ourselves. It was unlikely that the new cook was watching us in the same place, or that Pavlov's dogs had come to get even with him or us. We got to the Admiralteskaya station quite calmly and entered using the password. From there, everything was simpler. From here, a trolley was sent every day to Nevsky Prospect, to the giant underground city, from where the mathematician wanted to get back to the Technological Institute. But there was no trolley, so we went on foot. We walked towards Nevsky Prospect and immediately heard singing. It was unusual, but no more unusual than seeing a fake cook. It turned out that under St. Isaac's Cathedral there was a huge underground temple. There, under the real cathedral that was above, under the dense forest of wooden columns that had turned into stones at its base, under the earthly Petersburg, there was an underground Petersburg, and the priests prayed for a return to the surface, which would someday be sent to the inhabitants as a reward for righteousness. This lower city had a cold, so above there was a whitish Chukonsky sky, described by the best writers of the empire, and here there were forests, disorder and rubble, bags of concrete mix, wet boards, lattice steel trusses. Semetsky explained in a loud whisper that 3 generations of underground Petersburg had built this symmetrical temple, and in one place there was a special staircase on the upper platform of which you could kiss one of the logs of the foundation of St. Isaac's Cathedral. 3 generations of the few parishioners from among the metro residents walked past this construction waste and prayed for the day when they would rise through the thickness of the earth, through the swampy soil, and if not they, then their souls would ascend upward into the empty space between the Vyborg granite and the Ruskala marble. We left our weapons on the porch, but at that moment it turned out that neither the mathematician nor Mirzo were following us. Vladimir Pavlovich and I nevertheless insisted on seeing what was inside. We did not argue for long. The mathematician was immersed in his book, and Mirzo did not go for the obvious reason of the difference in vertens. Semetsky showed us where to stand, and we stood in the church for half an hour, listening to sad and quiet singing. An underground wind swayed the few candles and wires with electric bulbs. The priests were holding a service. There were almost no parishioners, and I wondered what kind of parishioners there could be here. Raising my eyes, I suddenly saw high up, on the edge of the smoked vault, among the icons covering a large wall, a small wooden baby. But only high up at the royal gates, I remembered, privy to the mysteries, a child was crying that no one would come back. "What is this?" Semetsky said in a loud whisper. "You should have seen the church under the lavra. You stand there and understand that the spirits of the great are floating above you because their mortal bodies are above the level of the vault. That is why they say that these are the churches of the last day, beyond which every servant of God can only ascend upward. 2 temples on the underground axis tell us about this. Without waiting for the end of the service, we went out and approached our hosts. Without saying a word, we shouldered our backpacks and went on. The mathematician led us to Nevsky Prospect, and the boss's plan became clearer to me. The mathematician did not just want to establish connections between the cities. He apparently looked for approaches and information for his comrades or bosses, if he had any. He wanted to play his trump card in a conversation with the Petersburgers, find the coordinates of the right people, and bypass the long chain. When you are passed from hand to hand and you travel between people, depending on someone else's will. Or even more cunningly, if he, our cunning mathematician, is kicked out, then so that he does not leave empty-handed. But such layouts will break your head. The mathematician, I thought to myself, did the main thing. He gave me wings in different senses of the word. He took me to the city where, perhaps, my father still lives. After Nevsky, which we really didn't like, with its tension and wary residents, we stopped in a strange place. In the junction between the tunnels, I saw a strange light. At the beginning of the corridor, there was a small house, as if assembled from chips, but it only resembled a dollhouse, and in fact it was a partition, from a small window of which a yellow light of a weak lamp was pouring. There, behind the window, a man was sitting in a chair with his back to me, and was not paying any attention to the noise behind him. I called out to him loudly, but the man did not even move. Looking closely, I realized that he had headphones on his head. He did not hear anything. From the depths of the corridor, an old woman in a headscarf looked out and smiled broadly. To be honest, I have forgotten how to hear people smile like that. The old woman, continuing to smile, said, "This is Filimonov, my husband. He listens to music all the time. He still goes to the public library for CDs. He is not afraid of anything. We moved here specifically to be closer to the public house basements." Filimonov took off his headphones and looked at me with interest. "Do you want some tea?" asked the grandmother. Come on, sit down quickly, we have some wonderful concentrate. And I just put the tea on. Vladimir Pavlovich and I sat down, and the mathematician and Mirzo went ahead, to the authorities, to some more equipped rooms. Vladimir Pavlovich also became emotional and took out a can of pork and an inviolable bottle. No, the old woman waved her hands, smiling weakly. We can't have any of this, but you drink. Filimonov apologized and, putting on his headphones again, sat down in a deep armchair. And I thought how amazing it was that these two old men lived here, as if in a time that had stopped. Nothing seemed to change for them. Inconveniences did not frighten them. They lived with headphones on their heads, and grief flowed past them through the tunnels. I understood with my mind how fragile their world was, and suddenly my heart sank, missed a beat. Tears almost welled up in my eyes. Damn. This feeling was completely inappropriate for me. It was somehow unpleasant. It's one thing when you understand that your life is finite, but when you understand that in front of you are defenseless people who somehow miraculously survive in the midst of historical madness, then you are overwhelmed by horror. You should only be afraid for those who are dear to you, and at the same time defenseless. And only old people and children can be so defenseless. We rarely had children, and most often by accident. But they rarely lived to old age, these ones did. And it was for this miracle that I was afraid. However, Then we came to Sadovaya, a huge branched-out station, which really became a city. And this city was a trading bazaar. Peddlers scurried here and there, and the most popular goods were cartridges, pills, and batteries. What's more, you could buy everything here: food, clothes, dishes, and books. You could even buy a motor locomotive, so they said, but it was not for us to check. They cheated everyone, but they cheated cleverly, imperceptibly, and if you noticed the deception later, you only threw up your hands, almost smiling. But theft was punished severely. In our presence, they caught a woman who stole several packages of aspirin. They stripped her, tied her to an information pole, and beat her with copper wire, soaking half the station in blood. This impressed us beyond words, but Semetsky decided to stay at this station. Some poetic impulse took possession of him, and our companion disappeared into the chaos of this bazaar. We also split up as soon as we got to technology. It seems that the mathematician really had some interest in the Technological Institute, or rather, aside from it, in the laboratories, and all according to the instructions of his amazing book. Moreover, this interest was such that having reached technology and settled in the guest corner, they immediately let Vladimir Pavlovich and me go free. They did not need us there either as porters or as witnesses, so the owners surprisingly calmly let me go to the neighboring station. And free bread. And neighboring stations gave me the opportunity to look for my father, and this means a lot to me. And here is what it was connected with. At Sennaya, in the middle of the hall, I met gypsies. In general, there were quite a lot of gypsies in the metro, and I saw them at almost every station. This nomadic people between stations had lost most of the attributes of their tribe, and gypsy women could be seen not in colorful skirts, but in black trousers tucked into combat boots. However, sometimes such an outfit was complemented by a red bandana and a necklace. Noticing that I was looking at them closely, one young gypsy woman, she was wearing a skirt from under which the toes of her tarpaulin boots stuck out, beckoned to me with her hand. Looking me straight in the eyes, she offered to tell my fortune. "Oh, let me tell you my fortune," she said in a low, smoky voice. "You will be happy. I will tell you what you want. You will know my thoughts. You will live well." It was all not very interesting, but the pollen of the Queen of the Night was breaking, knocking on my temples with evil little hammers. I heard the gypsy's friends whispering, discussing me like a pig ready for cutting. So I suddenly said, "Tell your fortune. You want to tell your fortune. And what do you take as payment, beauty?" "Well, how much do you need to pay for this?" "Pay," the gypsy answered. "You can pay, bold one, with whatever your heart desires. Even with antibiotics, even with machine gun cartridges. If you give me a little, it will be good. If you give me a lot, I will say thank you." "Well, tell your fortune," I said. "However, let me tell your fortune myself. Come here." I took her small, dirty hand, really dirty, with a diesel stain, and at the same time smelling strongly of fish. It seemed as if she had just stolen, without fear of punishment, a ration of bream from a drunk standing nearby. She gave her hand willingly, laughing and saying something in gypsy to her comrades, who immediately surrounded us from all sides. "Give me some money, you will be happy," she said in Russian, and, pulling out a deck of cards black with dirt, licked her thumb. "Gypsies," I said. "You will tell fortunes after me. I will tell fortunes first." I took the hand of the young gypsy and began to pretend to concentrate and peer into the lines of her dark palm. "I will tell you this. You saw me, but you do not know what you will have to do in the very near future." "Well, tell me, will you be a gypsy?" She laughed. And I said, "You will tell me," and quietly continued, "How to find a man who is called here. The pilot." I did not expect that this name would have such a powerful effect. Suddenly the faces of the gypsies changed. The old man standing by the column recoiled. Some old woman pulled off her kerchief, threw it over herself, covering her head. The girl pulled her hand away and shielded herself from me with it. From the side, it might have seemed as if I was going to hit the young gypsy, but I did not move. And seeing this, the gypsy shouted, "Be quiet. I will tell you everything. Wait here. We do not know you. We will discuss." I do not know whether I was afraid when the magic of the nickname was confirmed, but my heightened hearing also tormented me. I heard all the words of the gypsies, although they conferred quietly and fearfully. My ears rang from this unusual acuity of hearing, and I even groaned. Finally, an old gypsy came up to me. I saw that under his open coat, tucked behind a wide gypsy belt, was a large Stechkin pistol. "Why do you have such a word?" he said. "What do you know? Tell me, brother, don't be afraid." "Tell me, brother. Don't be afraid. They're our people. If you tell us, we'll tell you ourselves. If you don't, we can't believe you." I said that I was related to the pilot, and the gypsies took another step back. The old man, however, sighed and beckoned to me with his finger, and they led me to a strange place behind the Senaya, where a market of secret and forbidden things had formed. The gypsy led me to a strange man from the southern outskirts. This guy was not a gypsy, but he had a strange appearance. This southern man was small and nimble, somehow not from St. Petersburg. It turned out that he really was from the southern outskirts and from the south of St. Petersburg, but actually from Kharkov. His name was Rabbit Killer. At first I thought he was a murderer, but no, he was just a thief. Then I asked what was the matter. Was his last name or what? Krolikov? But no, he forgot his last name altogether. He had something to do with rabbits. Maybe he stole them and killed them. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that he didn't kill people. Or he killed them in such a way that he was afraid to tell. And in our time, being ashamed to talk about a murder already says a lot, already a kind of indulgence. The rabbit killer said that he was one of them in a gang where the main leader was a pilot. The rabbit killer praised him for his cunning and courage, and I immediately believed that this pilot and network were my father. I waited for a dream and looked for waypoints in my sleepy visions, road signs, but I didn't dream of anything. Absolutely nothing. I didn't dream of my father, or my home, or anything at all that could seem like a road sign. There were no indications. Every time I woke up with an empty head. completely cheerful. In my sleep, I didn't sweat and didn't bring any prophecies from excursions to the dark side of consciousness. And while we were walking through the tunnels to the south with long stops, my new friend told me how he got to St. Petersburg. As you may remember, before the Holocaust, there was a sluggish civil war in the Ukrainian state. And when everything exploded, we realized that our problems were just seeds. The end of the world came from the side from which no one expected it. This was a real ruin, and not the one that our homegrown politicians were shouting about on every corner. In the end, those who managed to hide in the Kiev metro, the Kerch catacombs, and in the underground fortifications of the Sevastopol naval base managed to save themselves. Well, and here in Kharkov, of course. We once had a very strong engineering school there. The Kharkov metro held out after the Holocaust, but we were especially afraid to go outside, beyond the city. What was on the mainland, no one knew. The conflict destroyed all more or less powerful transmitters, and we fed on rumors. However, the radiation was moderate, unlike the rest of Ukraine. There were enough ordinary radiation protection measures, no more terrible than those that my father remembered, who lived between Kiev and Chernobyl as a child. And then I grew up, was finishing elementary school, when I got involved, as my mother said, with a bad crowd. Some guys appeared in the city, strangers. They were supposedly bringing special mushrooms from St. Petersburg, which was a long way and risky, special mushrooms that were grown somewhere in greenhouses almost near Murmansk. There was some nuclear power plant that had survived there, I think. So, they organized the production of this crap using its energy. And in Ukraine, after our Armageddon, everything in nature changed, and the flora began to behave in a special way, not like before. All the cattle died racing with people, even the pigs. Imagine Ukraine without lard. Well, the people, of course, need to brighten up their lives somehow. At the markets, they were selling St. Petersburg mushrooms under the counter, rolled into jars labeled honey fungus. I was in the chain and quickly rose to the position of head of the entire local sales thread. My family looked at this approvingly, and in general the concepts of good and evil, as well as other ideas about decency, were blurred. For several years I was preparing to move north, and then, finally, the deliveries slowed down. Someone was ratting in the St. Petersburg wire. The wire was assembled. The guys sat for a week, missed the deadlines, and still found nothing. I could have suspended the work. I could have sent someone to sort it out. This someone would have passed the order to someone else, that one to someone even further. And with each step, the responsibility would have fallen, and the risks of the performers would have grown. But no one considered the performers in our system to be people. Firstly, no one saw them, and we only accepted the goods through the window at the border. Secondly, these were not our workers, but Russians. However, Sasha, in other respects, our business was no different from the usual agricultural one, which became no less criminal than ours, due to the fact that crops had dwindled to almost complete disappearance. And so I went to set up business in the north. I volunteered myself. The gang was tense. Everyone was shaking their heads. But they helped and sent me off. Pulkovo Airport turned into a glass funnel. The city's residents had been living underground for many years, like moles. Those who remained on the surface resembled monkeys jumping in the desert mania of our Gazprom during the previous war. Gazprom? I asked again. Gazprom. It doesn't matter. It would take a long time to explain. So, we quickly shot one of the suppliers who wanted to drown the flow of mushrooms from Kharkov. Well, to change the flow of goods and payments, of course, too. The deed was done, but I was late returning. My accomplices were killed by the locals, and there was no connection. There was no one to return with, and I had to sit it out here at the distant stations. I had to live here with the Leningrad Peter people. Listening to Krolik, I made new discoveries for myself. What was a proud cultural capital turned out to be a normal city, and to the south of the center, from the Narvskaya station, some thugs walked through the tunnels. Normal criminal life. Where would we be without it? We came to Baltiiskaya, where the cops had been sitting tight for a long time because the Metro Internal Affairs Department used to be here. The cops were kind of on their own. They weren't really involved in security anymore. But they were like a cork blocking the Kirov Brigade's exit to the center. At the station, the cops turned out to be a small but well-knit gang. They looked neat and all wore brown zip-up flight jackets, like a uniform. I said I needed a pilot. Pilot? How do you know a pilot? His deputy asked me sternly. Just in case, I didn't confess and explained that I had gotten into trouble on the way home. I kept the version about me having news from my homeland for the pilot himself as an interim version. And I didn't even mention family ties. But it turned out that the pilot and a small detachment had just been locked in some dead-end tunnels by enemies. The pilots lived between despair and the desire to recapture the Ataman. It was possible to sit in this distant tunnel for several days. It reminded me of an old joke that Vladimir Pavlovich told me about catching animals that had once escaped on the Sokol. I caught a boar. So bring it here. It won't go. So go yourself. He won't let me. The Kirov guys clearly didn't want to lose half the brigade while storming the tunnel. They waited until the pilot ran out of food, water, and ammo, and the pilot's subordinates were sadly shifting around in their caches, tunnels, and technological dead ends. Reasonable behavior, I think. As it was written in one of the books I read in the abandoned library, you need to wait long enough and then everything will be fine. Your friends will lift you up in their arms and your enemy's house will float past you. 2 days passed like this, and this waiting was only good for one person, me. The pilots were on the verge of anarchy, and although I didn't like it, it was only because of this that they tolerated the stranger here. I had only one recommendation from the rabbit. Yes, here they called him simply Rabbit, and I just smiled at the thought that he himself bore the name of the animals he once slaughtered. If, of course, the story of his nickname was about rabbit breeding. They didn't let me near a gun, apparently keeping me in quarantine and making inquiries. But a couple of days later I had another comrade, a friend of Rabbit's from the mushroom wire contingent, who looked like a deacon. He confirmed that although I was a Muscovite, I was a reliable comrade, like nothing but vodka, and 2 recommendations were already something. They asked me what I could do, and I answered, an electrician. I fixed the lighting of the station's perimeter, they put me on rations and returned the gun. Several days had already passed, and I was hanging around among the flyers without much to do, and even exchanged the same leather jacket that served as their uniform for pills. I caught myself thinking that I was putting off meeting my father. I was already playing out in my head how we would hug, how we would start telling each other about our life apart. The dead end was the moment when I said that it would be nice to go home. What if he answered that his home was here? But my blood was boiling in my veins anyway. My heart was bursting with adrenaline. I had been anticipating a meeting with my father for so many years, and I still couldn't imagine what I would tell him when it turned out that he was here, in these bandit tunnels forever. The first thing I saw at Narvskaya was a man hanging in the tunnel opening. He was wearing that distinctive quilted jacket that the gangsters from the Kirov factory wore. An incomprehensible puddle had formed under the corpse, and it hung like a road sign, something like a combination of start braking of the first carriage and stop shooting without warning. Here I, the former one, should have run my hands, started complaining. Why did I, look and then examine? I would have walked on and not paid attention. But in the tunnel, it is very difficult not to see the hanged man. You have to really want to not see the hanged man. You have to blind yourself so as not to see him, and he will still climb into your nose. You will smell him at the entrance to the gallery. Or I should have screamed about the fact that the ashes of the whole class are knocking on my heart, and I have no right to turn away, since I have set off on such a journey. Probably it was a mutant, and most likely it was a bandit who killed people, and now death has disfigured him. Or life underground has disfigured him. And I will be the same here, and they will disfigure me. There is no escape from this, and I do not need to resist. I need to get used to it. Maybe ahead of me there are tunnels after tunnels, hung with victims of showdowns. After these phrases I should have sighed heavily and continued my journey. And I, sighing, went on, muttering, "Well, fuck you. I'm looking for my father, and I'll find him at any cost." But, hand on heart, I liked everything that was happening less and less. No, I was not an angel, but the war that I saw here was not at all like anything else. Bestial and terrible, under the motto, "You die today, and I tomorrow." The cruelty was combined with a strange concern for its own. The rabbit gave me earplugs, saying, "Always carry them with you. They will come in handy, and at the most unexpected moment." I did not understand why I needed them, and I figured out why I needed to carry earplugs much later. There was something strange going on with my hearing. Sometimes a special psychosis would come over me. It seemed to me that I could hear what was happening in distant tunnels, and the sounds were ordinary. For example, a drop falling from the ceiling, the rustle of a lizard in the rock. It began when I visited the Queen of the Night. In Moscow, I had not noticed anything like this, but so far it did not bother me, and I did not panic. But I took earplugs with gratitude. Really, just in case. The opportunity presented itself, and sooner than I thought. In the meantime, I watched the confrontation in overcoats, gradually turning from a witness into a participant. In my native Moscow, there was still a concept of long-term benefit. Live yourself and let others live. True, one maniac was once hanged on the remains of a Ferris wheel, and anyone could see the body through binoculars. Not a single evil spirit ate him, and he hung there until he rotted. But that was a matter of everyday life, and here they often killed without any sense or benefit. Apparently that was the climate they had. But I stopped myself right there. There is another Petersburg. The Petersburg of military doctors from the Lenin Square station, the desperate technicians from Technologicheskaya, the cheerful traders from Senia. They exist, too, and they probably won't go anywhere. I was interested in how the pilots and other criminals were burning out with the gods. Religion had gotten all mixed up, and new bizarre cults had emerged. I was increasingly sticking to Rabbit. Rabbit was a thief with a mystical bent. A crook and a thief, he was, however, quite normal. But his friend on the mushroom theme was a special person. Everyone simply called him Hammer. I knew that hammer meant hammer, but this man didn't resemble a hammer in appearance or character. He still recommended me to the locals, which made me feel obligated. Well, to be honest, later he got quite interested in me with his confusing, strange speeches. This character was not just into mysticism. He also looked like some kind of sectarian, with his thin beard and long hair scattered over his shoulders. What kind of hammer is that? His respectable appearance, however, did not stop him from committing robberies in the tunnels. We once went up to the upper vestibule of Nevskaya, and he began to pray out loud as if in a temple. It turned out that he was praying to our father Stalin and his brother Kaganovich. I asked, gesturing with my hand around the dilapidated room, "And what is this, anyway?" "This is a temple." Stalin stood here. "Look." He waved his hand in a circle with a guide's gesture, and I saw that all the characters depicted here by the walls were looking at the center, at the gaping emptiness, in the place of which something had clearly been before. So what? Was Stalin here? Well, yes, only Stalin was not. He is always there. He wrote in his book, "If people of good will gather somewhere for a rally, then I will be among them. And here is also a convenient place. People come here to pray. They also come to the center. We have another monument to Stalin there. With a camel? Well, yes, you see, you know about it yourself. We have another place for prayers on Zhevka, but it is difficult to get there. And from there, prayers reach more reliably. To Stalin, I no longer understand, Hammer. Well, what's wrong with that? They prayed to Lenin too. Somewhere there are plenty of churches, but here we have this. Stalin generally loved working people. But here we have proletarian areas. He was a so-so person. You don't understand much. I know that you're just out of the loop, from the distant Moscow region. But tell that to our believers. I'll see what's left of you. Have you been to Novokuznetskaya and to Kropotkinskaya? I've only been to Kropotkinskaya as a child, and I've been to Novokuznetskaya, but not for long. Nothing special, but it's very dark. The lighting is dim, and the people are strange. They say that this station is very bad, but I don't know what the matter is. Well, Sasha, I'll tell you. This is the difference between the Moscow Metro and the St. Petersburg one. They both used to be named after Lenin, but internally they are completely different. And don't believe those who say that the whole difference is that our metro in St. Petersburg is deeper than the one in Moscow. This is all true, of course, but it is not only about the depth. Despite the fact that all our stations are, as a rule, deep laid, we have no fewer mutants, and much more problems due to quicksand. There are engineers like racketeers who constantly milk us, tricking us into scheduled and unscheduled services. Hammer launched into a discussion. The thing is, he said, that their entire metro was built after Stalin, while the Moscow metro experienced a change of idea. You understand, Sasha? Each of the significant historical eras leaves behind structures that are unique to it alone. He spoke with inspiration. The Lenin Pyramid, Stalin's Baroque palaces and high-rise buildings are structures tied to a certain style, unthinkable in another era. The Moscow Metro is also a mystical symbol. People have been riding in it for decades, not realizing how they are imbued with the mysticism of the metro architecture, not realizing that they are starting to talk not with fellow travelers, but with the statues at the stations. In my opinion, passengers usually do not look at the walls of the stations. Passengers have more than enough other concerns. I saw old photo albums with pictures taken at night at the stations. They took pictures at night so that there would be fewer people and it would be possible to make a longer exposure. But such shooting with a long exposure played a strange joke on the viewer in the photographs. There are strange, transparent shadows everywhere, through which the marble of the columns shines through. It remains a mystery to us who they are. But perhaps these transparent creatures are a symbol of the socialist man. I began to doubt Hammer's sanity. Some nonsense. Ghosts. I believed in the Kalashnikov assault rifle, in electric generators too, but I had no need to believe in ghosts. Listen further, continued Rabbit's friend. You must remember that the symbol of the New World was precisely this transport structure, a station on the way to a bright future. The darkness is thick. There is no light. He cannot see forward or backward. At the 10th arena, the exit became close. At the 11th, the arena before dawn is glimmering. At the 12th arena, the light appeared. He hurried, seeing a grove of stones. Carnelian bears fruit, hung with clusters, pleasant to look at. Lazurite grows with leaves. It also bears fruit, funny to look at. What is this? This is the tale of Gilgamesh, who goes along the underground path of the sun god Shamash. Do you understand that this is about a premonition of a subway train leaving the tunnel onto the station platform? Well, do you remember this feeling? I remember it vaguely. But there is something else that is important. Traces of ancient civilizations are everywhere in the Moscow metro. The first of them is the theme of the ziggurat, a stepped tower, which was assigned to the main building of the country, the asymmetrical ziggurat mausoleum on Red Square. Do you remember that it is asymmetrical? I did not remember anything like that, but I nodded just in case. Features of a stepped pyramid are also in the high-rise buildings of Moscow. Have the buildings survived? Some have definitely survived. I can't speak for all of them. So Stalin's skyscrapers, in shape exactly like the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, were the reference points of the city's perspective. The ground-level vestibule of Dynamo has the same silhouette. Dynamo, I drawled nostalgically, remembering everything that was associated with this station. Have you looked closely at the bas-reliefs and patterns of the stations with ancient glyptic? This is a brocade pattern of Babylonian roller seals. If you get to Novokuznetskaya again, you will see that the station looks like it was rolled with a giant roller. The figures there are repeated periodically from plot to plot. After all, you will not argue that the ancient type of Sumerian state is, of course, the prototype of the state structure of the USSR on the eve of World War II. The sail-shaped columns of the Kropotkinskaya station exactly repeat the columns in the Egyptian courtyard of the museum located nearby. But here, the most interesting thing begins. The rectangular space of the island stations of the first stage is the inside, the interior of the burial chamber. Only the rails are attached to the burial chamber, and the road to a bright future opens. That is, to the land of the dead, and our hermetic gates. This is generally a symbol of the transition from one kingdom to another, obviously. But here is where the turning point occurred. I'll even tell you when exactly it happened, in 1943. Then shoulder straps were introduced in our army, and, let me tell you, they almost introduced epaulets. Stalin exchanged his military jacket for a white and gold tunic and began to look like our last emperor. Well, yes, I butted in. And people who were tried before the war for Russian nationalism were retried after the war with the wording of servility to the West. But Hammer didn't listen to me and didn't hear me. "It's all about the Comintern," he exclaimed heatedly. With the disappearance of the Communist International, the old spirit of the metro disappeared too. The transition from the Komsomolskaya Radial to the Komsomolskaya Koltsevaya station, so to speak, took place. Not a single station built in the pre-war years was national in spirit. But Kiev and Beloruskaya, named after the railway stations of the same name, that is, the stations opened after the war, are already decorated with Ukrainian and Belarusian ornaments, panels with corresponding plots, lampshades, and sculptures. The empire has the heir to previous empires. That's what was there. But here in St. Petersburg, everything opened after Stalin's death, and therefore there was no turning point. Everything is simpler here. Our city is strict and simple. All that is left for us is this place. Not only Hammer, but Rabbit told me much stranger things. He said that everyone was afraid to go to the surface in Avtovo because there lived a special kind of mutants there, similar to combat hippos. I asked again, and Rabbit insisted that they resembled exactly combat hippos, merciless and scary. The most terrible thing about them was that no one knew their habits. No one had ever figured out what these creatures needed, who could sit in the ruins for quite a long time, and then suddenly break away and rush down the street, crushing their own and others. He also told me that a group of northern ninjas had recently appeared in St. Petersburg, that they had cleaned out the Kunstkamera and tried to fight the machine gunners of the Kirov Brigade with antique swords. The ninjas were immediately mowed down, but the swords that everyone was interested in disappeared without a trace. The war with the Kirovites was flaring up. At some point, they decided to attack. The Kirovites had come to an agreement with the military from secret facilities under the plant. I understood the military. The Kirovites were right next door and quite predictable, and the flyers were a nuisance to everyone. Therefore, the military, having thought the situation over, entered into an alliance with the work crews and let the Kirovites through their territory. The day before, I had been in this dead-end road and noticed that there was no cement between the stones of the masonry there. But I was a nobody, and I didn't particularly consider the bandits my own. Only my father's name kept me here, not comradely feelings, and I didn't share my doubts with anyone. And so, at night, the Kirovites carefully dismantled the masonry and went forward. After a short battle, we were pressed to the border of the stations, and even I, an outsider, had to take up arms. With my heightened hearing, I would have instantly gone deaf from the gunfire, if not for the earplugs. And to myself, I said thank you to the rabbit. He flattered me. All around us, iron was rattling and screeching. It was a non-working tunnel in which there was nothing but garbage and a motor locomotive with a platform. Using this motor locomotive as cover, the Kirovites attacked us. There were old homemade hermetic gates there, locked by some traitor. Rabbit tried to open them, but the mechanism was jammed. The cables here had rotted long ago, and it was unlikely that the electric drive was powered. Rabbit started turning the steering wheel of the manual drive, but that's when they got him. I was standing very close and saw how his flight jacket was tearing on his back, as if someone from the inside wanted to crawl out through the brown skin. Only then did blood splash in my eyes and burnt stuff hit my nostrils. I didn't feel very sorry for Rabbit, but still, he was one of the few with whom I could talk about something other than food and everyday life. And now it became clear that a small, furry animal, small for all of humanity, but huge for all of us, had crawled into the black darkness of the tunnel and, sniffing, was choosing which of us to start with. The time had come to kill, and I needed to pull myself together. I lay down behind a stack of stone tiles and singled out the winners, slowly walking towards us. That's how I've changed since the start of the journey. Smoothly, as I was taught, I brought the front sight to the neck of the one walking second, namely second, because the first would definitely turn around at the sound. That's what happened, and the second bullet was for him, but here I slightly miscalculated, and it went in a little lower than I wanted. So I killed a man, even two. I thought that I would listen for a long time to these feelings inside me, to how consciousness changes after you kill for the first time. But I felt nothing except satisfaction from an accurate hit. That's how happy I was when I accurately hit the target with a slingshot. And here it was the same. They were enemies, we met in battle, and I put them down. And now, maybe, they will put me down, and then the tunnel rats, who will not have a pink ribbon on their necks, will eat me. I hit, I hit, I hit. And two bodies created an obstacle for the attackers, and that is what we needed. Only the flyers, maybe once, rose into the air, which I did not believe, but they shot disgustingly. Shooting in tunnels is always very scary. The bullets ricochet off the cellular tubing. It is completely impossible to understand where the shots are coming from, and the flyers fired in bursts, not really aiming. The air was filled with the whistle of bullets and the crackle of crumbling tubing linings. It is scary to imagine what would have happened if the tubing had been cast iron. The Kirov fighters were much more terrible, worse armed, terribly trained, but surprisingly fearless. The flyers shot much less, having immediately distributed the targets, but there were still many more Kirov fighters. A normal Stalingrad was happening around me, and the fighters from that side were in the same short quilted jackets that I had seen in pictures in old books. Am I on the right side? And in general, Is there a right side here? This was completely unclear to me. Only one thing was clear. I needed to see my father, and then everything would become clear. Then they moved the motor locomotive forward, from where a machine gun immediately fired short bursts in our direction. Here, of course, everything became simple. Whoever illuminated whom first won. The bright light of the headlights blinds, and you turn into a pitiful animal, rushing in the beam of the searchlight. The two flyers who ran forward immediately had their stupid heads blown off. It was the first time I had seen a human head fly apart, like a water ball that burst on impact. Then one of the more or less cool-headed flyers stopped the locomotive with a burst of fire at the headlights, and I hid for now. Calm down, even calmer. Of course, I'm not the same boy who raved about his absent father, but still, this is your bloodbath, not my bloodbath. Well, it's a bloodbath, but don't get carried away. All criticism should be in moderation. As the station master of Sokol said at the meeting with the pig farmers, I tried to persuade myself. But it all ended rather quickly. The flyers finally shot the driver of the other locomotive, and as he fell, he pressed the reverser. The locomotive slowly went back, and the Kirovites ran. That is, they sort of ran, but fragmentation mines planted the day before went off in the tunnel, and those who ran the fastest, already believing in salvation, turned into a sieve. The pilots ran along the tunnel to join their comrades, among whom was my father, of course. Finally, I saw my father from afar. I looked at his back, covered in a civil aviation uniform. I recognized him immediately, but then he turned around and, seeing him in profile, I suddenly doubted. Why all this? What if it wasn't him? I always believed that I could find my father. My father was big and handsome. That's how I thought of him as a child. Now I understand that he wasn't really handsome, he was short, but most importantly, he was very smart. He was very smart, and I didn't believe that such a cunning person as my father could perish even in this hell. But no, it's definitely him, I finally decided. After all, I had been praying for this for several years to the gods that were at hand. All my dreams came true, but I was not happy. Because what began next was worse than the war. The massacre of the Kirovits took place right in the tunnel, in the invisible demarcation line between the stations, turning the enemies into waymarks for potential guests. I understood that the place was chosen specifically for demonstrative purposes. For convenience, the prisoners were made to kneel. The pilot himself shot the defeated ones in the back of the head. I was used to the fact that in underground wars they do not take prisoners, but in my life I saw nothing like this. Bang, and a new prisoner fell to the side. Bang, another one fell. But no, it could not have been him. Father was cunning. He loved practical jokes, but he was never a cruel killer. I looked at the leader in the blue jacket with gold chevrons, and recognition gradually left me, like the water in the sea receding at low tide. Now he was sitting on the front platform of the captured rail car, dangling his legs and smoking some unimaginable local homegrown tobacco. No, it wasn't him, and happiness filled me. No, it wasn't my father, and my search would again seem endless. No, I wouldn't even find anything for sure, but that was better than having a cannibal father. I had to leave, but it turned out that it wasn't that easy. I ran north through the tunnel, but only managed to get to the station boundary sign. I was caught there, and the huge Siberian, with whom we had just fought shoulder to shoulder with the Kirovits, tied my hands behind my back. He grinned. A step to the right, a step to the left, an attempt to escape, a jump onto the contact rail, a provocation, and they drove me to the pilot. And what to do with this one? The pilot looked at his assistant in bewilderment. Well, the new guy wants to go free. He left without asking. I explained, of course, that no one leaves us but he. Let him go, and took another drag on his stinking cigarette. No, it wasn't him. That's right. And I went towards Baltizkia, without any hope of meeting my own. Actually, it was completely unclear who my own were now. Vladimir Pavlovich had probably run away, and I had no doubt that the mathematician and Mirzo were already on their way to Moscow. But in reality, everything turned out differently. I saw a strange, barely discernible silhouette of a man peeking out from the junction. It was Vladimir Pavlovich. He waved his hand at me. The mathematician and his adjutant went to reconnoiter the inclined passage, and Vladimir Pavlovich remained to wait for me in the junction between the tunnels. Our employers suggested that we set off without me. They really didn't need me. Vladimir Pavlovich was our railway specialist, and my flying career was over. They had no use for me, except to throw me under the enemy's feet if anyone pursued us. "Forward," our bald mathematical friend shouted, and I said to him, "Go to," and I was surprised at myself because I had gotten out of the habit of swearing over 20 years, and I know that swearing simply does not lead to any result. I understood what Vladimir Pavlovich was talking about. There are moments of fatigue and tension when people forget everything that civilization has taught them, and such a moment came to Vladimir Pavlovich, although I had never seen him irritated. They waved their guns in front of my nose, but I said, "Shoot." Finally, I had a chance to break your nose before they shoot me. "Begin, you pig-slobbering wimps." These last words were completely out of keeping with Vladimir Pavlovich's appearance, and I decided that they were from somewhere in his past life. We seemed to sense the will, like two servants who gradually understood the weak points of their masters. In a word, the mathematician and Mirzo swallowed the mutiny on the ship and were waiting for me to go to Vasilyevsky Island. My comrade fell silent, apparently expecting me to tell him, but I, hesitating, sat right down on the concrete, thinking up an answer to a clear but unspoken question. But no one asked anything. Vladimir Pavlovich apparently guessed that if I said nothing, everything was so bad that it was painful to tell. And he was right. As it was written in some magazine that I read as a child, it is better to chew than to speak. These words flew out of the man's mouth in the picture, and his choice was clear. And remembering this drawing, I examined the tins of food in the bags, and in one of them I found a can of cold beans, mixed with large pieces of pork. I beckoned to Vladimir Pavlovich and began to eat in silence. The spoon had a long handle, one for both of us, and we took turns putting it into the pot. I was absolutely sure that I had never tasted anything better in my life, and this too tasted like a story in one of those books I read as a child. "I swear by my mother," I muttered with my mouth full. Only now did it become clear what a real big meal is. The mathematician and Mirzo appeared in the midst of our pleasant occupation. "What's holding us up?" the mathematician asked in a dissatisfied voice. "Are we ever going to get going or not?" Instead of answering, Vladimir Pavlovich scooped up beans with his spoon, licked it, and handed it to me. We did not say a word. In a word, until the can was licked clean. "Well, I see. We were just messing around," I said, wiping my mouth with my hand. "We weren't doing anything. And of course, we're late. And it's all my fault. Honestly, I understand." While we were walking along the tracks, Vladimir Pavlovich explained the situation. It turned out that the mathematician and his friend hadn't found the girl they were looking for, and they desperately needed the... We lived in strange rooms of the Technological Institute, right behind the workshops, so the drafts constantly brought us the smells of soldering, hot metal, and some kind of chemicals. The place was not very good, damp, and the food was meager, and the days were not very cheerful, although I was happy with each one. Terrible hungry days when the daily ration was reduced to a noticeable handful of disgusting bare berry on lavash. But I loved, bitterly loved, this terrible, God knows where it came from what iodine and silty banks it appeared, Neva, dampness. On the wall, Vladimir Pavlovich showed me a sign with instructions. There, on the cardboard with yellow spots, it was written, 15 SVK consisting of GRD, OOD, half SG 2AC, this is 27 Kapat, GMA Cat, and 1 SG without 1 star. Should carry out SNAVR at ONH-32 in the area of checkpoints 11, 12, 8 to evacuate people from KZPRU-13 and shelters 10, 11, and further work in the OPONP in accordance with the order of NGO ONH-2. What kind of gibberish is this? I asked. This is not gibberish, answered Vladimir Pavlovich. This is a completely new language, now almost lost. I don't even remember all the words. Here, ONH is a national economy facility, PRU is an anti-radiation shelter, SVK is a joint rescue team, SNAVR is urgent and necessary emergency recovery work. But what their team consisted of I don't understand. Here is GMACAT. It's something mechanized. No, I don't remember. In general, radiation alarm at 8, full evacuation begins at 9. So it has been hanging for 20 years, or maybe 40, judging by the national economy. It hasn't gone anywhere. And where are these rescue teams? Where is this national economy facility number 2? But while I was conducting my, thank God, unsuccessful search, the mathematician was conducting his own, and they were much more promising. It turned out that the mathematician had found a link to some Vaska, who could know the mysterious girl. They explained to him that Vaska was Vasilyevsky Island, but here, too, he showed persistence and found a possible address for the girl. Someone from the locals helped him, and it seems to me not unselfishly. Vladimir Pavlovich demonstratively inquired about the place where we were heading. I approved of him. Now I had learned a lot about underground Petersburg, about huge cities, and about the Muslim enclave in the north, who lived near Ozerki and Kolomyagi. By the way, on Kurban Bayram, the smell of lamb reached Petrogatskaya. I learned about the wars for forbidden goods on Dibenko Street, and about the gloomy blockade dwellers, creatures who lived forever and gradually became oracles and judges. In general, I learned enough. For example, that there are a lot of places where a stranger, as soon as he pokes his nose, will immediately turn into an exhibit of the Kunstkamera. Only he will not swim in alcohol, but in underground rivers. And Vladimir Pavlovich persistently asked, "What is the exact address?" The mathematician showed him some paper. 5th line, 9711. And so we went to Vasily-Ostrovskaya, making our way forward for a long time and in a confused way. In the morning, the mathematician checked the papers and maps again. He looked at the magic piece of paper several times, which still read 5th line. There was an incomprehensible squiggle here, 97911. But, squinting, I saw how mistrustfully he looked at it, as if the numbers could have changed places overnight. We left Technologia, and, when we started haggling for a trolley at Senaya, Semetsky came out to us, straight from the darkness of the tunnel. His face was inspired, and I realized that he was eager to read us a new poem. They didn't let him read, but they took him on the trolley. The trolley was moving slowly, and I lazily watched dozens of thick and thin wires twisting along the walls, and the road signs flickering. All the way here I moved first along the road signs of my dreams, and then along the road signs of the metro, but I still did not find happiness. And the signs turned out to be false. I remembered the crossed-out circle in the dead end before the blocked tunnel, saying that this was, in fact, a dead end. And then the dead end turned out to be just the passage from which the Kirov gang went forward. Vladimir Pavlovich was sitting nearby, ruffled like a sick bird. Suddenly he perked up and said, "Do you know what the main similarity is between underground Moscow and underground St. Petersburg? And that's why the air is the same here. On the surface, it is different. There are all sorts of curbs with curbs, entrances with front doors, but inside, there is one atmosphere. This, Sasha, is the social atmosphere of a besieged city, where the difference between wealth and poverty lies in the possession of a piece of horse meat. These were strange words. Where would horse meat? These were strange words. Where would horse meat come from? He probably wanted to say pork. But despite everything, we moved comfortably and got to Vasily Ostrovskaya quite quickly, and were already knocking on the doors of the inner perimeter of the platform. With the official permission of the owners, we went up to the surface without hiding anything. We immediately found a giant, abandoned supermarket, where we got hold of 2 wheeled carts. The backpacks were loaded into the carts, which moved poorly on the broken pavement, but it was still better than dragging this weight on ourselves. We reached the end of the 5th line, but discovered that there was no house 97 on it, and could not be. The numbering of the houses ended earlier, and the last building was some kind of factory, apparently a defense plant, judging by the huge metal barrels that rolled out of its gates. The barrels were made of stainless steel, almost untouched by time. They were lying in the middle of the street, like sections of secret missiles. Wait, it suddenly dawned on me. It can't be that this is house number 11, and apartment number 97. That is, the other way around, you understand? The mathematician understood me instantly. "Let's get ready," he commanded. And we, having risen, meekly trotted back. Finally, we stopped in front of the desired house, huge, going deep into the block, with some kind of inner courtyard. The house looked surprisingly shabby, and even overgrown with unpleasant purple ivy. In general, I noticed that there was quite a lot of this ivy here, that it grew from nowhere, but entangled entire blocks. But I, sprinkled with pollen from the queen of the night, was used to it. We went up to the 4th floor and found an apartment. It turned out that some gigantic apartments here were cut up into tiny rooms. That's why the address had the number 97. But one false wall had collapsed, and the whole led to the neighboring apartment, completely different in style. It was the home of a rather strange man, decorated with numerous plastic trinkets, moldings, and gilding of such a radical chemical nature that 20 years of timelessness had not affected it. Even the semolina, on its bent, sprawling legs, was golden. But here I don't know what kind of gilding it was. Semetsky ran into the far room again, just like in the house on Austrian Square. The situation was exactly the same. That is, the balance of power was the same. We were in ambush, and the unknown natives were potential prey, and Semetsky was locked in the far room in the same way, so as not to scare anyone. Only here he could not climb out the window. He had not yet been noticed in rock climbing. I was put in the corner in the kitchen, so as not to interfere, and that was all I needed. I was there like a schoolboy, almost picking my nose. It was the mathematician who was looking for his relative, and not me, my father. It was not my holiday, although our sitting in ambush was repeated, but with a completely different result. Evening had not yet fallen, as we heard footsteps. Those who were climbing the stairs were clearly not afraid of anything. A group of young people burst into the apartment, and as soon as they all entered, Mirzo quietly closed the front door. In front of us, hiding in different rooms, wandered rather strange natives. They were young, did not look like the dregs of society, but rather resembled musicians from a symphony ensemble. All in black, that is, in long black raincoats and wide-brimmed hats. They brought some bags into this empty apartment, and apparently were going to spend the night here. Someone lit a cigarette, and I realized that it was not tobacco, but some kind of grass. I did not know very well what hemp smelled like, but perhaps it was it. And then the mathematician came out of his hiding place, and calmly, but quite loudly called, "Lena." One of the girls screamed, muffled, and her companions froze in place. One of the blacks began to pull some kind of weapon from under his coat, but Mirzo gave a short burst right from the stomach, which knocked the young man aside. He fell to his knees, a fountain of blood spurting from his chest. His heart was pushing out the liquid in portions, and it seemed as if he was spitting on the dirty floor, and then he fell over, having lost his strange hat. I must have been distracted by this, because one of the blacks was unexpectedly close to me. Bah! Yes, it was a girl. I didn't realize it at first, because she was tall, and her long coat hid her figure. She had also lost her hat, but this didn't bother her. She didn't run up, but somehow jumped up to me and hit me with her fist in the chin with all her might. What a blow, I thought, before she slammed me into the wall with her fist. I didn't lose consciousness for some reason completely incomprehensible to me. This crazy girl kicked me one last time, pulled open the door that was nearby, which I confess I hadn't paid attention to. The old wallpaper cracked, the plaster fell, and the girl, her boots stomping, rushed down the back stairs. Well, damn, I went for some bread, as the station master of Sokol usually said, telling a joke about how a bloody head rolled out from under a locomotive. My head really was almost falling off. Meanwhile, the situation in the room had changed. The girl was tearing herself out of Mirzo's hands and screaming something incomprehensible. "Lucas, Lucas!" She was apparently addressing the one who was running away. One of the black ones was lying as before in the center of the room, and a rather large puddle of black liquid had already formed under him. The second one was half lying in the corner, not twitching, and Vladimir Pavlovich was standing by the wall, whistling melancholically, as if all this had nothing to do with him. The mathematician was nowhere to be seen. I looked around. The back of my head had left a small but clearly visible dent in the plaster, with cracks radiating from the center. Rubbing my head, I went to the others and almost became another victim of this merry event. The young man who was sitting hunched over in a daze finally pulled out a gun, some old, elegant little pistol, and fired without aiming. By a strange coincidence, everyone wanted me dead today. The bullet whistled over my head and knocked a huge piece of stucco off the cornice. Mirzo, practically without looking, fired a burst back, and the young man was thrown back against the wall. He spread his arms like a pinned bug with wings. The Tajik approached him and made a control shot, and then he repeated this with another native. I can't say that I liked it, but I didn't have to choose sides in this shootout. After all this, Mirzo suddenly gave the girl a sharp and short blow to the back of the head. She went limp, and he tightly swaddled her with a cord that he took out of one of the bottomless pockets of his unloading vest. Mirzo threw the girl onto his shoulder, like a limp prey, and carried her through the gap into the neighboring apartment. There, in the empty, huge room, the mathematician, who had somehow moved here, was waiting for us. He was sitting on a stool. On his knees was the same ledger. He looked closely at the girl's face, holding her chin with 2 fingers. The girl, having come to, turned her head and tried to bite Mirzo, but he briefly and accurately slapped her across the face with his palm. "What did we see in him? How are we guilty of getting involved with them?" Vladimir Pavlovich muttered, looking at me. "An SS man, an animal. I myself saw that he looks at people like meat." I remained silent. What SS men? What was he talking about? It looked as if in the fresh air and sunlight some ancient books began to emerge from the depths of Vladimir Pavlovich's consciousness. And he was talking not to me, but to their characters. "Oh my God," said the mathematician. "There's so much nastiness on her. They're crawling all over her." "Who's crawling?" Mirzo asked in surprise. "Lice. We haven't had any for 20 years, no, 30 years. Before talking to her, we need to wash her first. Disinfect her. That's another thing," I thought. The mathematician, as if guessing my thoughts, added, "It doesn't matter that there's no time. Shave her. I hope she doesn't die from being unaccustomed to it." "No," I thought sadly. "She's not his relative." "Mirzo, obeying his instructions, lit a fire on the amazingly beautiful tiled floor of the hallway. When the remains of 2 armchairs began to crackle merrily in the fire, Mirzo placed a bucket in the center of the composition and began to heat water. The girl looked at us, and especially at the mathematician, who had moved his stool closer to the flames, with a hunted look. With her animal instinct, she sensed the boss in him. The furniture was quickly turning into coals. It was calm and scary. There was no desire to talk about anything. Then Mirzo poured water into a large basin. He dragged the girl to the basin and pulled out his large, and, as I knew, razor-sharp knife. The girl began to tremble slightly, just as much as the ropes allowed, and the ropes allowed her very little. At that moment, I understood what ancestral memory was. Mirzo acted in the same way as his ancestors before the cataclysm, and the ancestors of his ancestors, and I imagined him cutting the girl's throat, just as his relatives cut rams, with a quick and sharp movement, and then jerking the carcass upward to let the blood flow. I even shook my head to drive away this vision. Meanwhile, Mirzo dipped the moaning girl's head in warm water and began to shave her, from time to time, throwing clumps of hair of an indeterminate color onto the concrete floor. She no longer moaned, did not beat under his hand, but only trembled very finely. And I again remembered that in those books that I read, rams eventually went limp, realizing that resistance was useless. Mirzo shaved the girl's head, and then I understood why all this was started. Right on the top of her head, the outlines of a strange tattoo of a line and a number were visible, and the tattoo turned out to be done in 2 colors. On the top of her head, on the gray-white skin, bizarre lines appeared, and it was clear that over the many years that had passed since the tattoo was applied, the map had blurred. I didn't ask any unnecessary questions. It was clear what it was. Well, that's good. I don't need to know the details, although it was clear that on the girl's head was part of a Leningrad metro map with some numbers. The mathematician looked at them closely and commanded his adjutant. "Hold it straighter, straighter," I said. The camera clicked a few times, and then the mathematician began to redraw the diagram in his book. I realized that he didn't fully trust electronic equipment. The batteries would run out. We would end up in a powerful magnetic field. You never know what could happen. But the drawing would remain, and you could always check it. If you haven't gone blind, of course, or the drawing itself hasn't disappeared, torn, or burned. Life has proven to me many times that the simplest recording methods are the most long-lived. Someone told me that after the cataclysm, there were drawings of desalination machines, according to which these devices were made, which reliably supplied the population of the metro with water. But no one could read the manuals that were saved on electronic media. Some incompatibility of formats took its toll. They simply did not open on the surviving computers, which were bought at a high price at other stations. The computers turned out to be useless, and the miserable and decrepit paper lived on and stored everything that was needed. Meanwhile, the mathematician finished, redrawing the picture, and slammed his ledger shut. "That's it. We can untie you," he said, and stood up from his stool. The bold girl was untied, and she sat down on the floor, discouraged, making no attempt to run anywhere. The mathematician was pleased, and this was understandable. He had already done something important, written it down in his little book, and improved his bastard world. I was just worried that he would remove the girl as an extra witness. But it seemed that the mathematician had no time for her now. He cheerfully ordered the supplies to be taken out, and we laid them out on a madly beautiful carved table, already cut in many places by someone's knives. We gave a piece to the bald girl, and she silently chewed the pork concentrate, as if she had forgotten that her 2 comrades were lying below, not yet completely cool. We, however, forgot about Semetsky, and he himself appeared, swinging his door and the piece of wood he had propped up against it. I thought that Semetsky would ask how and what had happened, but no. As soon as he saw the girl, he began to babble joyfully. "Baldy! Come here, Baldy!" The girl obediently pressed herself against him, and only now did I examine her carefully. She seemed a little crazy to me. I had seen such people in Moscow, among the refugees who had been hit by psychotropic radiation. The person doesn't exactly go crazy, but becomes too docile and trusting, just like a young puppy, constantly counting on care and affection. I don't know, maybe the same thing happens here from the mushrooms, but I didn't even think about it. But the poet didn't miss his chance, and didn't even go quickly into the depths of the apartment, but crawled sideways with the bald girl. The mathematician looked at this sullenly, but did not interfere. The girl was, apparently, something like a dumb animal, but he needed her for now. I thought that he would shoot her or give her to Mirzo to slaughter like a sheep. After all, a living girl threatened the secret, those drawings and photographs that the mathematician had made. But for some reason the expected purge did not follow. This undermined the logic of events in my eyes, but did not sadden me at all. What saddened me was that for the second time I found myself on the side of evil, forever becoming its accomplice. Then I would not be able to tell any conductor that I did not want it. That such is the logic of life after the cataclysm, or as they say here, the catastrophe. For some reason, the mathematician decided not to return along the previous path, but the previous path had changed. When we left the house, a terrible wind simply tore the front door out of our hands and slammed it so hard that the sign was relevant. The cold was terribly chilling me. We went out onto the embankment. Mirzo was the first to see the glint of optics in the window and darted behind a broken lamppost. We also fell like sacks near the grating. I realized what was strange about this house. The windows were broken everywhere, and here they were carefully put in. On the first floor they were covered with carefully nailed boards, but upstairs there was real glass. One window was left open, and there I saw a figure of a man who waved his hand at us. After consulting, we went to this ethnographic museum to hide from the wind. The owner in a braided jacket met us at the foot of the stairs, and he turned out to be a rather strong, I would say, well-fed man with a Chinese beard. What can I say? The keeper of the Kunstkamera was a real Chinese. I saw few Chinese in my life, but Koreans, yes, we had enough Koreans on the Sokol, and Grandpa Kim, who taught me breathing exercises, was a real Korean. But the man standing in front of me had a completely different eye shape. Kim taught me that you need to distinguish Eastern nations by the shape of their eyes. The Chinese bowed ceremoniously, and I noticed, jokes aside, there was a light machine gun behind him, leaning against the door frame. Apparently different guests had been in this building. The Chinese was not at all surprised to learn that we were from Moscow. He was not surprised at all, neither by the bad weather outside, nor by us, except that he looked intently at the girl who was stamping her feet in front of the stairs. He took her head in his hands and looked into her eyes, and after looking enough, he clicked his tongue with pity. This happens when a person is delighted with some object, and then sees a crack or a chipped edge in it and becomes sad. But after that, the Chinese took 2 metal balls out of his pocket, which immediately began to jingle, and put them in the hand of the girl Lena. She began to roll them in her palm with delight, and was completely absorbed in this activity. Moreover, she went so far that we did not hear or see her until nightfall. The Chinese said that it was high time to drink tea. The treat was small, and at such an hour it was expensive. We sat down to a low groan, and the Chinese poured tea with a clearly noticeable, putrid taste. I drank and praised it. Vladimir Pavlovich too. But the mathematician was not at all pleased with this situation. The mathematician looked at the Chinese with visible apprehension. They were like two bears in one den, and it seemed that the mathematician was afraid that the Chinese would find out something unnecessary about him. The owner of the Kunstkamera seemed not to notice anything, and the exhibits around him seemed more animated. Mannequins in armor with spears shook their heads. Wadded robes moved in display cases, and ancient maps fluttered on the walls. It only seemed that way to me, of course, but after the auditory hallucinations that I began to notice in this city, I would not be surprised by anything. The Chinese, smoothing his braided jacket, meanwhile, regretfully told me that many people tried to break into his domain to drink alcohol from jars with freaks. True, later some more organized hooligans stole all the samurai swords from the exhibition, and the Chinese general frozen in the display case, in his strange robe and helmet with a high plume, resembling the brown cylinder of a cattail inflorescence, seemed to nod and say, "Yes, yes, all the samurai and Chinese ones too, by the way." In time with this nodding, the golden tassels on his stomach swayed. That's what kind of things the draft did here. And outside the building, by the way, the wind was such that it bent the trees. Nearby, in the corner, stood a wax figure, or so it seemed to me, of a man with a wart. He was a bit plump, not young, dressed in a service jacket, and what he meant was completely unclear. However, I was prepared for the fact that everything here was unclear to what end. And so it turned out. My comrades went to the basement, where a special toilet system with a real drain, though manually filled, worked. It was clear that the owner understood toilets. I did not stand in line and began to make small talk. "And what is your patronymic?" the owner suddenly asked quickly. "Yes, you can do without a patronymic." "No, it is better with a patronymic. Such are my rules." "My name is Alexander Nikolaevich," I answered, and pronouncing my patronymic, at that moment I remembered my father. It was like a slight prick of reminder. "Tell me," I asked, "who is this cook wandering around here?" "A cook." I told him about the fate of the dogs on Palace Square. He didn't immediately guess what kind of pseudo-chef was snacking on them, and then said, "Excuse me, you saw the balls. These are the balls of this biomass. For some reason they like to call it pseudo-flesh, but it's the same thing. There is a primitive mind. These balls copy objects. I saw how they formed a semblance of the Admiralty lion, and in your case, they repeated the shape of some plastic chef who has been standing near a dead restaurant for 20 years and calling out to absent passers-by. That's why he was so unnatural. After all, this advertising chef is probably the only one in this city who wears a white jacket and a cap." Then they started talking about monuments, of which there seemed to be more on the surface than people. I wanted to ask about the strange holes in the sculptures, but the Chinese guy beat me to it. Oh, a hole in the emperor. They wanted to move it, but they tore off its tail. After some confusion, it turned out that he was referring to the monument to Alexander III. It was this that the Chinese considered to be the real wandering monument, which was seen in different places in the city. Not long ago, after the Holocaust, they wanted to drag it to Smolny, but the conductor came to these people, and the monument now stands in the middle of Litaini, right on the platform of the tractor. Well, and with a hole instead of a tail, yes, that's true. No, I decided, perhaps I shouldn't ask him about the other sculptures. But, as if guessing these questions, the Chinese frowned. "You know, Alexander Nikolaevich, you seem to me to be a strange person. You are an unkind person." No, I see that you are offended, and I didn't want to offend you at all. After all, you are a complex person, with a purpose, as they say. You don't just have self-interest here, but an idea me, And in this city, such a person is difficult. In this city, an idealist is twisted just like from a lethal dose of radiation. I've seen many such idealist people here in search of something. And it was definitely not worth sticking your nose into Vasilyevsky Island. You know, it's good not to live here, but to die. People come to us from everywhere to die. Do you need death? Or do you need a meeting with the Macabre that lives here on Vasilyevsky? Are you ready for it? But you don't need anything like that. There is no point in looking for the devil who has it behind his back. What do you mean? What the hell? I decided to intervene in his sermon. It's just a saying. And if you want advice, and simple advice, in a word, you shouldn't have come here. The keeper of the Kunstkamera stared into my eyes with his yellow and unblinking ones. He looked at me in such a way that I naturally felt worse and worse. You have become acquainted with this city, like that student who, through ignorance, became acquainted with his teacher's wife. And the teacher noticed this, but did not show it and remained silent. Once he sent the student to feed the pigs. But as soon as he entered the barn, he immediately turned into a boar. Well, as you understand, Alexander Nikolaevich, this teacher immediately sent for a butcher. The butcher slaughtered the boar and began to sell the meat. Nobody guessed anything, especially since the teacher told everyone that the young man had not visited him for a long time. Only his father was looking for him. But that's a completely different story. Travel stories are always built on the fact that someone is looking for someone. Suddenly, he burst out laughing. Come on, stop it. Don't be so serious. Buddhists also come to me. They are cheerful people. They are not afraid of anything. Nothing at all? And not even dogs? Not even dogs. And they are not afraid of the conductor, because the conductor is somehow parallel to their ideas about life and death. When it all began, they calmly moved from Primorsky Prospect to the station Staraya Derevnya, and none of them died on the way. And now they sit in the twilight of Staraya Derevnya and blow their long pipes from morning till night. True, these Buddhists from Staraya Derevnya have a special, modified faith. For example, they eat meat and carry weapons. I am not their judge. I have a working toilet here, isn't that surprising? And a Buddhist who knows a lot about cutlets. This is completely natural. Now, to figure out how to pump water into a toilet cistern with a foot pump, that's science, and human whims are the pros of life. We live here, and this is a happy life in hell. We all live like that. A single plan of hell is already the fruit of a great genius. What is it? It's Pushkin. Yes? I said it just to fill the pause. People always have a word for every occasion. And my interlocutor, this Chinese devil, he spoke like some Indian chief, as if one of those masks that hung behind the glass of his giant cabinets had spoken. I dreamed again of an airfield over which a heavy veil of clouds hung. The rain pounded the meteorologist's house, next to which a red and white sausage hung limply. There was no sentry at the gate, and I simply walked around the same red and white barrier and went to the tower. It's strange that in all these dreams the tower looks different every time. Now it was a building that looked like a flying saucer, just like the Gorkovskaya lobby, only raised on a high pedestal. I walked toward it diagonally across the field, although this is considered a bad omen. My father would never have walked like that, and neither would I. I cursed myself for it, but I walked anyway, until, completely wet, I reached the doors. The doors were closed. I had not met anyone in this dream. There was no one to ask what to do next. And now, waking up and pressing my hands to my wet face, I realized that the world had changed even more. The wind howled demandingly and menacingly behind the wall, making me want to drop everything and run, not making out the road, just to get out of this house, humming like a trumpet.